it is possible that people will be so much happier, but not only that, the children get their parents back. And I think that's kind of what drives me. And it's kind of like I can't imagine like the direction of my life would have been. So find your zone of genius. USMC, United States Marine Corps. USMC stands for you signed the mother effing contract. So yeah, you can't leave. So I was at a pretty comfortable base, pretty safe base. Well, I say safe. Actually, a year after I left, it got bombed and stuff, or it got like there was like a missile attack and stuff. I'm comparing myself to myself. Like I had never experienced that level of hardship, and I was forced to go through.
Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Samsung. How are you, Samsung?
I'm good, man. I don't remember much in those days. I just kind of, I think what I do remember from my childhood is it's a kind of the classic story of a lot of immigrant families, which is in my community there were a lot of Korean Americans, and I think it's kind of like one Korean family goes to America and they kind of like tell their buddies, and they all go to the same place. And so where I was living, there were a lot of Korean Americans, and a lot of their stories were similar in that they were the first in their families to move to America. So that basically meant that their parents were always working, and at the time didn't really understand that. You just kind of like compared them to American families where the American dads would like take them fishing and stuff like that. And I never like played basketball with my dad, so I thought that was always kind of like a desire of wanting something that the Americans had that I didn't. And I think it's a common story when you hear from other like immigrant kids. And I think I couldn't process or understand that when I was younger. So I had this animosity towards my dad, and like, why didn't you play with me? Why can't you be like the American dads? It only was until high school when I read this book called The Jungle. So The Jungle was by this author named Upton Sinclair, and I think it was like early 1900s or something. But basically, he wrote this book about the meat packing industry. I think it was just like a weird topic, but it was just like but by him, Upton Sinclair, writing this book, what happened was people didn't know that it was so brutal and like so unhygienic and like really dangerous for the meatpacking industry until they read the story, and it caused like all these like changes in regulations of like making a more safe environment, blah 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 blah. But that's not the part that got me. The part that got me was it talked about he was also an immigrant, this character in the story, and he it was kind of talking about him immigrating to the US and like working these crazy hours and trying to spend time with his family. But what's interesting is that was like the first time that I realized what it was like to be an immigrant going to a new country and trying to just survive and take care of your family. And so that was like a pretty profound moment for me because I always just kind of like hated on my dad. Not in a bad way, I still listen to him and stuff, but just in my heart, I was like, dude, why couldn't you be there for me? But this is the first time I realized, like, wow, you had a really hard life. I think at that time, though, like, there's this thing where you realize things, like kind of like head wise, like your knowledge wise, you understand it, but it doesn't go to your heart yet. And then so normally it's like you hear something new, you think it, and then it leads to feelings, and then you kind of like feel it in your heart, and then through that it expresses itself into action, right? I wasn't there yet. It was just knowledge, but I didn't feel yet. It wasn't until like many years later where I kind of realized like, wow, it must have been really hard for you. And what's funny is I moved here 4 or 5 months ago. I'm immigrated. We essentially immigrated to Korea, um, and I'm living a taste of the immigrant lifestyle. I mean, nothing like him. He knew nobody in the U.S. Like I have resources, I have a good education, I have a good work background, so I have a lot of things that I can do, and that's thanks to him. But I get like a little taste of what it's like to be the head of the household, to have to take care of your family, and to feel the pressure of that. And I definitely developed more empathy, and I like to kind of differentiate. I learned this also in my high school English class. I think the difference between sympathy and empathy. So sympathy is I feel bad for you or I feel for you, but I don't know what you're really going through because I've never been through it myself. Empathy is I feel for you because I've been there and I can access you because I've been there, and like you can access them in a different, like a deeper way. And so, and when they know that you've been there, they're like, they open up like their hearts to actually have a heart to heart conversation, because the other people, they just give sympathy. But empathy, that's what I feel like changes lives. Anyway, I don't know, we talked about all this, but yeah.
Yeah, no, no, it's very empathy to sympathy. The linguistic definition of them and then how it differs is pretty interesting. And does that in any way, shape, or form connect to your current company, the missionary company?
Um, I haven't thought about that. I think, uh, how does it connect? I don't know. I think like kind of right off the top of my head, it doesn't. Actually, oh,
No,
maybe there is a
because
connection.
it's like what you started out with, and I was just curious. Or
Yeah. Well, the concept of like sympathy and empathy, like I have a lot of empathy, I guess. Um, so I've been wanting to move to Korea for like 10 years, 12 years, and I just like never kind of made it a priority. It's always like, got to go get another job. I'll make more money and then I'll go to Korea or whatever. Um, but this past summer, I came and visited Korea for about 2 months. And one of the realizations I had was a deep sense of empathy for Koreans. Um, and what I mean by that is Koreans kind of like Korean work culture is known for being very intense. Uh, like I've heard stories, as a Korean American, you would hear stories of people like working at Samsung, until like the wee hours of the night.
at Samsung.
Yeah, exactly. My bad. Um, to like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and then you have to go to work at 6 a.m. and like you work on weekends. And I'm like, I don't know if that's true, but that sounds terrible. Like that sounds terrible for the person. It sounds terrible for their family. And then I came here and I met someone who had worked at Samsung for like 15, 20 years, and he confirmed it. He confirmed it for me. He's like, actually, the term that he used, which was interesting, is he said, it's like we're living like almost as slaves. And I'm like, wow, that's a very extreme term to be used. But he was like, look, my health was deteriorating. I have kids and I wasn't spending time with them. And so for me, the empathy wasn't for the him per se. It was for his children, because me being an immigrant family, child of an immigrant, like I'd gone through that of feeling that like I wish I could spend time with my dad. Like I would happily get less money or have the family get less money if I could spend time with him and just like do stuff with him, you know? And so I had this like deep sense of empathy for these kids. And I think that there is a connection to the missionary company, because the concept of the missionary company is, people often think it's like religious missions. It's actually from a term or this thing, John Doerr, he's one of the early investors of Google. He taught Google the concept of OKRs, objective key results, and then he basically became an evangelist. And now, like most of Silicon Valley, is the default is OKRs. Even here in Korea, they know about OKRs. But John Doerr said, like people who are like going to change the world are really successful. They're teams of missionaries, not mercenaries. And so he went on to kind of explain what's the difference. And the essential difference is teams of mercenaries, they are motivated by money. Like they're motivated by like kind of fame, like, that kind of stuff, right? Teams of missionaries are motivated by the mission. Like to them, the values of a company mean a lot. What is the impact that they want to make on the universe? That means a lot to missionaries. So I'm a missionary. I feel like you're a missionary. I think we talked about this. So in that sense, like there's this concept of like missionaries and mercenaries, but in a mercenary like world, in a mercenary like company, you basically bring in people, you use them up, and when you're done with them, you toss them. It's kind of natural, right? It's like market dynamics. That's what you do. And mercenaries know that's the rules of the game. That's how you play. Um, so I guess I was thinking most of the world I feel operates that way. Most of the world operates in mercenaries because that's what people know. Like that's the way that you work. That's the way you make money. Missionary organizations, like for people who are like super into the mission of the company, it's very rare. I think it happens a lot with like a lot of like early startups, like Google when it first founded, Facebook when it first founded. I met someone who was like employee 70 at Facebook, And he's like, what kept him at the company was he believed in the mission. So there are these companies that have that are missionaries, but as they grow, they kind of become more mercenary like. There's another place where you find a lot of missionaries, which is nonprofit organizations. So there's a lot of missionaries who believe so much in the power of what they're trying to do that they will take a pay cut, get paid so little because they're just so passionate about it. Um, so anyway, my point is, but people look at that and they say, well, there's not a sustainable business model for missionaries. So what I would call like a missionary company. A missionary company can attract missionaries, retain them, develop them, and actually make a lot of money, like be very successful, be very innovative, right? I feel like generally people think that's kind of like a pipe dream, and they're just like, it's not really possible. But I question that. I'm like, but is it impossible? Is the mercenary model the only thing that's available, or can you have a missionary model? And so this is where it's kind of eventually leading back to my original point. I believe in a missionary company. They, they have a strong mission, strong vision that inspires those missionaries. So the missionaries come and they work there, and the missionary company's like, dude, I don't need to track your hours because missionaries, they just work. They work because work is play because they love what they do, and they just keep playing and playing, which means they become better and better than everybody else. They know the subject matter, they know the domain way better than everyone else, and missionary companies. Actually, the funny thing is, the missionary company role at that point is to help take care of the missionary in the sense that it's like, hey, dude, you've been working really hard. Why don't you take the next week off? Like, you should relax because we want you for the marathon. We don't want you to burn out. And the problem with missionaries is they burn themselves out because they're so passionate about it and they don't really keep track of themselves. So anyway, but it also creates a culture of trust. So the reason that's important is because the upper management trusts these teams to empower them to like solve business problems, solve customer problems in a way that makes the company money. And so as they're going and running, they have to trust them. So if they trust the missionaries to get work done and their most important business objectives, would they trust their missionaries to have like flexible work hours so that they can go home and pick up their kids, right? And they can play with them, have dinner with them, and then sign back on afterwards, right? Would they be able to trust them? Of course. Like, why not, right? And it makes them happy that they have a strong home life. It makes the company happy because they're excelling. Everybody wins, right? And so that's kind of like my strong belief of what's just tied to the missionary company is like, I want to see this world filled with missionary companies. I think it's possible, and I think that it is possible that people will be so much happier, and but not only that, the children get their parents back, and I think that's kind of what drives me, and it's kind of like for the old Sam, for the young Sam that didn't have his father because of those circumstances. There's a lot of Sams here in Korea, and I see them, and it makes me so sad. And I'm like, maybe if I can help create this other work model that will catch on, then maybe those Sams can have their parents back, and like, what impact will that have on them and their future? So, super long answer
Yeah,
to
you
your
started out
question.
with a banger though on your college years, right? College to like when you first got your first job. What was kind of like that period like, and what did you kind of study?
Yeah. So, if it's okay, I'm gonna go one step before that, which is high school. And so in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I mean, I was just like, maybe computer programming. I don't know, doctor, lawyer. It's what all Asian parents are kind of telling their kids to do. Um, and I had no clue. And then one day, in my senior year, I'm sitting in my AP English class, and just to give you an idea, of all of my class of like 500 kids of high school, three went to the military. So it's very like not super like lots of people going to the military, but out of that class, my AP English class, which is kind of like advanced placement. So generally there's this stigma or this idea of people who go to the military, they can't get a job, so they're going to do it. That's why they go to the military. So I'm sitting in my AP English class, and this recruiter walks in. He's a Marine Corps recruiter, and he comes in. He's got like a cool looking uniform, the blue pants, the tan shirt, all this medals and stuff. And I'm just like, dang. And then he talks about boot camp. He talks about boot camp and how hard it is. And I think one thing that's always kind of been with me is like I always like to challenge myself, like to see how much can I do? Like like something silly. Like I'll be walking and I'm like, I wonder if I can hold my breath just to that stop sign. And then like I do it, I'm like, maybe I can go a little bit more. So
I do that as
oh
well.
really? I mean, I think it's driven by a desire of just test yourself to see like how much can you do, kind of a natural curiosity. So when I heard boot camp, some people join the military because of they have patriotism, they want to serve their country, all that stuff. I mean, honestly, my initial thought about that was I thought the uniform was cool. I thought the uniform was cool, and I liked the idea of boot camp to test myself if I'm a real man, just like the ultimate test, right? Um, Very naive. I was 18. Man, it's still older than you, but I feel like you were way more mature than me.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying. I'm trying.
um, yeah, but I so afterwards I just like had a single question, and he's a great salesman because he was like, "Well, why don't you come into the office?" And we started talking, blah blah blah. And basically we figured out, it's like, all right, let's do this. So I signed up for boot camp, and I asked my parents, and my dad said, hey, I think a man should go to military. Koreans, all males have to go to the military anyway. And then my mom's like, oh, I think you look nice in a uniform. So I'm like, okay, cool, let's do it. Um, I was woefully unprepared. Like I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And the funny thing was, I knew so little about the military. Like friends would find out that I was gonna go into the military, and this is like December, and then graduation was like in June, so it wasn't very long. And they're like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "You're not, it's not like you're stupid or poor. Like, why are you doing this?" And I'm like, "I just, Marine Corps and all that stuff." Um, and I went, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was like, man, it was like the fourth day. I was in my bed at night, and I was just like crying. I'm like, I need to get out of here. But the thing about Marine Corps boot camp is it's 12 weeks long. So out of all the other branches in the military, there's a Coast Guard, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is the longest boot camp, and yeah, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but that was like essentially my first job, and so the thing was for me, before then I got pretty good grades. So my parents, like most Asian parents, they would just say like, hey, your job is to study well, so don't even worry about working part time or anything like that. Like here's a credit card, here's a car. I had tons of freedom. I never experienced what it's like to like work hard and have to earn money and stuff. And so I learned a lot on that. One of the biggest financial lessons I learned, which is funny, is so they take all your stuff, and so you can't access it until you graduate 12 weeks later. So you're sitting there, and so every like 2 weeks you can go to the store and like you go together, they're yelling at you and stuff, but you can buy like soap or envelopes or for writing letters and stuff. First day I went there, I was just like boop 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 boop, just buying everything I need, right? Because that's what I was used to for the past 18 years of my life. The next time we went, I swiped a credit card, it ran out. I was out of money because we're only paid like X amount and it wasn't enough money. And I remember I couldn't get anything I needed or wanted, and I was so shocked at this naive 18-year-old who had always like been able to use a credit card, couldn't get the money. Ever since then, I had developed this thing about finances where it's like that will never happen again. Like that will never happen again. So I'm like always like, trying to be really careful about my finances and stuff. But it was just so funny that like an experience like that really shaped me. And overall, like after having gone to the Marine Corps, I think what's interesting with that as being my first job is wherever you live, you're generally in a bubble of people. Like you're in international school, so you have like kind of bubble of international students. Me, I have this bubble of people who generally were pretty above average, middle income, whatever they call it, middle class, upper middle class, whatever. Um, the Marine Corps brings in people from all over backgrounds, different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds. So I'm interacting with people I've never interacted with who have interests that I've never had, like hunting. Like that was another thing. Um, and so I think it really broadened my horizon. And people said that after I came out, I was older, I was much more mature. I was older, much more older for my age. And I think that happens when you face suffering. And for me at the time, that was like one of the biggest sufferings that I experienced. Like going to boot camp is essentially, um, I talk to people that have gone to prison, and we can kind of like empathize with each other, because in boot camp, like you wake up at 6 a.m., they're yelling at you, and you have like no free time. They're always on you, every second, and until you sleep at night. And even at night, sometimes they'll mess with you. So it's just you suddenly have immense amount of freedom, and you suddenly have no freedom. And so, and then the difficulty, and for the Marine Corps boot camp, you can't just leave, which once again I didn't really realize.
You can't.
You cannot.
So you can't say, "Oh, I just leave." No.
No, you cannot.
Wow.
So, kind of like a prison.
It is.
But it's a voluntary prison that you put yourself into. And some people joke USMC, United States Marine Corps. USMC stands for you signed the mother effing contract. So yeah, you can't leave. So there are people who actually there was one person who committed suicide. We were on the rifle range, and he killed himself.
in front of you.
Yeah, and no, not in front of me. It was in front of some other people. And we had this like memorial, and the drill instructors, they're the people that yell at you. I remember my drill instructor was like, I thought he was gonna be like, guys, if you're feeling like that, you need to talk to me, blah blah blah. He was like, that guy was such a wussy, and I'm just like, wow, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's, but I think through that suffering, once again, I was just an 18-year-old sheltered kid. I never experienced that type of hardship before. And I'm not trying to compare myself to others, but I'm comparing myself to myself. Like I had never experienced that level of hardship, and I was forced to go through. And I remember there was one time, so if you mess up training, let's say you're at week 4, they will recycle you back to week 1. And I remember thinking, if I get recycled, I might try to kill myself. And I think that goes to show you the state of my mind at that time. And there were actually a bunch of people that tried to commit suicide. Like, I don't know if they were really trying to commit suicide. Like, this is one dude. We were sitting in a class, and he raised his hand, and he said, I just swallowed 32 pills. It was like Advil or something. And the drill instructor, instead of being alarmed, he's like, basically go to the hospital. They go to the hospital, they pump his stomach, and they sent him right back. So, and back at the time, homosexuality was not allowed in the Marine Corps, in the military. Now it is, but at the time it wasn't. So people would pretend that they were homosexual to try to get kicked out. But then they would be like, nope, you're faking it. And they would just like keep them there. So it was like, that's how extreme people wanted to get out. We were also next to an airport, and some dude jumped the fence, ran across the airfield. This is San Diego airport. And then they basically caught him and sent him right back.
Not to the prison. I think he'd prefer the prison.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, basically, yeah. So, yeah, but once again, having gone through that, they basically say the fastest way of getting out of here is to graduate. And so I graduated, and I remember that really shaping like what I wanted to be. And then eventually I was like, hey, I'm going to college. Maybe I just become an officer. So what's very interesting is boot camp, which is basically get people to break them down. They come from all different types of background, break it all down, and then rebuild them as a Marine culture, right? So you have other identities, but they kind of say like you're not black, brown, yellow. We're all green. We're all different shades of green. That's what they said. So there's that aspect, and for enlisted, they're kind of like they're the enlisted people. They're like the worker bees. They have to kind of work, right? Officers, they're like the leaders, and so the boot camp is much different. I was very surprised. Boot camp is like you're staying here. Officer, they call it Officer Candidate School, OCS. They will make you stay for the first 2 weeks, and then it's either 2 6-week programs, so one summer 6 week, another summer 6 week, or one 10-week program. But 2 weeks you have to stay. After that, you can quit. But there's a catch. If you quit, you will never be allowed to come back.
Really?
They will never let you, because their thing is, if you quit on us once, you may quit on your Marines, and we can't have that. So if you get hurt and you're medically sent home, that's okay. If you quit, or if you get caught for an integrity violation. So like we had to take a lot of tests. If you cheat on a test or if you cheat on something, they will never let you back because they're like, if we can't trust you with this, we can't trust you to do the right thing with the lives of our Marines. So it was very different, and it was like officers up, like they were trying to get rid of you. They were trying to see like, are you worthy of leading our Marines? So it was a very interesting experience.
Well, it sounds very hardcore and it seems very tough, and you did a lot of physical exercise in there as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was another difference. For enlisted, like, it's kind of expected that officers, their kind of motto is "Ductus Exemplo," which is lead by example. So it's always expected that officers always have they are the role models. So because the young Marines, 18-year-old, 19-year-old, they're gonna be looking up to these people. So physical fitness is a big thing. Like you have to PT, physical train, you have to PT way better than the Marines. So it's like we were PTing a lot, like running a lot, push-ups a lot, like not pull-ups, all that stuff. Just we were doing a lot more physical activity. I think they were trying to test us physically, which also tests you mentally. So they want to see like you get to see someone's true character when they're super tired and they're super exhausted. You get to see who they really are.
Oh, and what are some, like, if you recall any like records or cool like physical things you were able to do, like run or deadlift like 200, 500 kilos?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like even I heard the same thing with special forces. So like I never went special forces. I have a lot of respect for them. But uh, even with special forces, like you expect that they can lift a ton of weights or do these incredible physical activities. Often not. They're actually kind of like more normal. It's just mentally they're super strong. And so I would say like I don't know. I can't recall any kind of like special things that stood out to me. I just remember there's this thing called the Quigley. So it's basically you kind of go through these obstacle courses, and they kind of warn you that like this Quigley is like nasty. It's like a swamp. You go in and you smell. It just smells
Mm.
really, really bad. It's just still water. It's just and you have to like go through this little pipe or something, and you have to kind of go into the water. And it's really gross, but I remember thinking because I did went in the summer, it's really nasty. But I went in the water. I'm like, oh, it's nice and cool. Like
Oh.
you're just in a different mindset when you're there. Um, but yeah, it was fun and interesting. One thing I do remember is we were having to do push-ups, so we were doing push-ups, and then my group's officer. So you have an officer assigned to you. He's a captain, which is about he has 48 years of experience. I remember I was doing push-ups, and there's just always PTing, and this guy comes right in front of me. He gets down and he does push-ups with me, and I remember just like, oh, he's doing like push-ups with me, and he's syncing up with me, and he's like, "This is tough, right?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he's like, "It's tough for me too." And I remember just that making a very like a very big impression on me, because you kind of think of them as like gods, they never get tired. But he purposely came right beside me, came in front of me, showed me he kind of went down from his high place, came down to my place, doing push-ups with me, and then he told me that he was tired as well. Like, why would he do that? Why would he do that? Why would he reveal a weak side of himself? And now, many years later, I understand why. There's a thing called so there's weaknesses, but there's also this thing called vulnerability. So vulnerability, I don't know the Oxford definition, but my way of understanding vulnerability is showing a weaker side of yourself with with a purpose. And I think he was showing that side of me to show me that he was human, that it's hard for him too, but he's pushing through. And I remember just being very like touched by that, and just thinking like, wow, that's the power of vulnerability. You don't want to just be like, hey, everybody, I'm tired. Like that's not what he was doing. He picked a very specific moment, and he was very strategic, and he had a very intentional purpose of sharing that with me to yield a certain result. And I was like, man, that's really powerful. And I have found that in the course of my life, vulnerability at being strategic about it, it really just like opens the other person's heart, just like empathy, and it really allows people to like, I've seen people just like bawl in tears, knowing that they're not alone, you know.
Hmm. And this kind of sounds interesting to the missionary company and what you're trying to go for, because it seems like the Marine Corps was kind of like felt like the mercenaries, just very hardcore and like forced upon you. And like currently, um, what you were talking about the not the family, the physical training and being sharing your vulnerability, and the someone up above going through the level of the people down below who's doing all the work, which it seemed like an interesting connection. But on from that, so you, if I'm correct, you were on like reserve afterwards for while you're doing your other startup, working for startups, and right?
Yeah, so basically, I did 4 years. It included a deployment to Afghanistan, and then while I was in Afghanistan, I knew I wanted to go to my next kind of career, and I've always thought business was interesting. So I applied for business schools while I was out there. Applied 3 places: New York University, Northwestern University, and Harvard University. I got rejected by Harvard. I got waitlisted at NYU, and I got accepted at Northwestern. And so, yeah, so we got back, and I was kind of talking to my wife. Actually, I remember like doing the whole application process when you're in Afghanistan. So I was at a pretty comfortable base, a pretty safe base. Well, I say safe. Actually, a year after I left, it got bombed and stuff,
Oh,
or it got like there was like a missile
it's
attack and stuff.
pretty safe,
I mean, I thought it was pretty safe. It was safe at the time. But anyway, um, it was annoying to write school applications, and I'm just like, I kind of want to do it. So I remember I had a satellite phone, and I called my wife, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, maybe I just stay in the Marine Corps or something. And she's like, I think you should. I think you should do it. I think you should keep going with the application process. And so because of her, I did. And then so I got into Northwestern, and so she wanted to live in New York, and she was like, maybe we should wait to see what happens with NYU. So just to give you an idea of rankings, at the time Harvard was like probably like number one, Stanford's number one, number two. Uh, Northwestern was ranked about five, and NYU's were ranked 12.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, I don't think we should wait. I think we should probably go to Northwestern. So yeah, so we went to Chicago, and then I basically, what was interesting is like until then, the Marine Corps was my only job at that point. So I just assumed that a job is something that you're not necessarily passionate about, but you do. I mean, you enjoy. There were parts obviously I enjoyed about the Marine Corps, but there were a lot of parts that frustrated me of like the bureaucracy, the like I wanted to do all these kind of like different types of solutions and changes, but there's all these layers and all this politics, and I'm just like, oh man, I don't want to do this. Like I remember I was walking with this guy in Afghanistan. He was like 16, 17 years in. He's like, sir, um, why would you ever want to leave the Marine Corps? You can, retire when you're 40, and then you can start your next career. And I'm like, that sounds terrible. Like I would not want to do this full time for a long time. So got to MBA program, and so that was kind of my thought of like, a job is a job. Your hobby is something else. So my hobby has always been technology. Like I've been listening to tech podcasts since like college. I love it. I love hearing about like the new technology, the new Apple products. I remember I was in Afghanistan, the new iPhone came out. And I'm like, dude, did anyone hear about the new iPhone? It was like, sir, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I'm like, okay, these are like not my people. But but I'm just like, separate them. It's separate. Work and your interests, separate. And then I was during my MBA, I was trying to get my job, which is being a consultant. So being at one of the top three consultants, McKinsey, Bain, or BCG. Those are like the top three consultants. They pay the most money. You get to go and consult for all these big companies. Amazing experience. I hear it sucks. Actually, my friends have spent many years there. They say the travel sucks and the hours suck, but etc. You get paid well. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I went through that, failed all of them. Like, I did not do well. And as a backup plan, I applied to this thing called like product management, and I didn't know what it was. And I went to the interview, and I kind of knew what it was, but I didn't. I just kind of like talked about like tech because I love tech. And they called me back for another interview, and I was like, oh crap, I should figure out what this product management thing is. Um, and I think one of the reasons I really resonated with them is because on my resume, there's nothing tech. It's just military. It's just Marine Corps, deployment to Afghanistan, whatever, political science, undergrad, nothing tech. And yet because I had been immersed in the world, just because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Like, it's just fun. It felt like play for me. I just kept doing it. So I was better than the average person and so I can talk about the mobile tech trends and stuff like that. I bought the first iPhone in 2007. That was cool. And so I went and I did this, and then I learned more about what product management was, and basically what product management was was in a business, you have to figure out, like, you have some amount of money, you need to develop certain products and services. So in a hardware company, you build physical things. In software, you can, because the cost of building is so much less, you can iterate so much faster, which means there's tons of competition. Because there's tons of competition, you have to, because there's tons of competition, you have to be really good with your product sense of, like, what are you going to build and why, and how are you going to differentiate from all the other competitors. So how do you do that? There is kind of two phases. There's the product discovery phase, which is building the right product. So you look at the market trends, you look at uh, uh, like, do customer interviews, you look at the industry, like, you do a lot of research to figure out, like, you basically build a business case of why should we solve this problem, and how are we also going to make money. We can't just solve problems for fun. We're not a charity. We're not a nonprofit organization. How are we going to make money? Cool. We decided we know what we're going to build. Now you have to deliver that, and that's called product delivery, where you're working with the engineers, designers, and then you build it, right? So this person I knew, who a friend who worked at Google, like, in the early years, he was like, all right, cool. So if you're gonna go into tech, which I knew nothing about the tech job world, he's like, you should become an engineer because they make the most money. But a lot of with some engineers, they eventually want to become a product manager, and because the product managers get to decide what to build. And so I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. The problem was, to be a product manager at the time in 2013, you had to basically be an engineer before. They wanted you to know coding. The reason they said that is because if you know how to code, you can get more the respect of the developers that you're working with. Um, I'm not an engineer. I got a product manager role. Now they're much more open to it in today's day and age, but at the time it was very difficult. But anyway, I got in, and then that's where I got to TripAdvisor, and yeah, that was a fun experience.
What was fun about it?
You know, I think one of the things that I remember hearing during my MBA program was there were a bunch of people who wanted to get their MBA and get into a manager position so they can have direct reports, to have people reporting to them. Um, for me, being as an officer, you're a 22-year-old and you're immediately, like, thrust into leadership. It's like a duh, that's what you're supposed to do. So for me, I wasn't really seeking that at all. I was in a completely new field in product management. So I was in a rotational program. So you would rotate across different sections in TripAdvisor. So my first was I worked on the TripAdvisor Facebook app. So they had this Facebook app. You would go in, you'd mark, I visited this country, these places, or whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of like a interesting tool. A few thousand users. It was like a few million users. I was like, whoa. So right off the bat, I was working with millions of users. And then the next one, I worked on their website. And then one after that, I think I worked on their international team. So I worked on, like, them learning that TripAdvisor had, like, the same site, but they had it in multiple different languages, like 30, 40 different languages, and just learning, like, how does that work? Like, that was kind of cool. You can't just translate stuff. Like, there's some things that you have to, there's a difference between translation and localization. So you have to, like, understand the cultural context and blah, 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 blah. So that was cool. And then the final team that I was on was the mobile team. And so back then, TripAdvisor was facing this really interesting thing where all their traffic was desktop. So that's where they were making their money. But mobile web was approaching 50% of their traffic. So they're like, man, this mobile thing is really important. And I'm like, dude, I want to go on the mobile team. And the interesting thing about the mobile team at TripAdvisor was they didn't have a mobile team. What they did was they acquired a startup in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. They acquired one company, they acquired another startup, and they put them together and said, you're the mobile team. So I'm like, because I also so TripAdvisor in Boston, my wife and I were thinking about moving back to California to be closer to family. So we're like, oh, maybe we can, move to the Silicon Valley location. And so I got into the mobile team. So I did a lot of trips back and forth, and they worked very differently. They worked very differently than the Boston team. The Boston team, the way they worked is like product manager thinks of a solution, some feature, uh, sketches it out, gives it to the designer. The designer makes it pretty, and then you give it to the engineer, and the engineer just, and you're like, great, it works. Not much more questions beyond that. When I worked with my first designer in the mobile team, he was like, "So why are we building this?" And I'm like, What do you mean why? Like,
You're not supposed to say that.
yeah. I'm like, what? Why are you asking me these questions? These silly questions. Just make it look pretty, designer. But once again, that it kind of went back to that's all I known. That's all I known. And then when I started working with him, I remember being like, man, because he understands the why of why we're building this, and he understood the background of it, the ideas and his thought process and the way he designed the product of like the flow of the users and where they should go, it was so much more thoughtful, and it was so nice to be able to have a great rapport with him and me. And so that was like my first taste of working with a designer of like kind of like the Silicon Valley way. And I'm like, man, this is great. Like, I want to keep doing this. And so generally, product trio, there's the product manager, there's a designer, but there's also the engineer. So they're generally the tech lead. And so we also had a tech lead who was great. Like, we worked great together, and we brainstorm ideas together, interview customers together. And I'm like, dude, this is the way to do it, man. Like, we're getting much more innovative thoughts. It's more fun, man. This is great. Um, but I think what basically happened for me is the first 2 years I didn't want any direct reports. Like, I just wanted to learn the craft of product management. But what happens is you're generally going to get to learn the craft, and then you start wanting to like do more. It's like I wanted to have bigger input into the direction of where we're going, and as a product manager, as a senior product manager, I didn't really have that control, and it would take a while for me to get that level of control. And at a certain point, I don't know. It's interesting for me to talk with you about this as I'm like reflecting on this. I haven't thought about this in a while. But I remember they had just moved to this beautiful location. They constructed this new building. I think the designer was like some designer from Ritz-Carlton or something. I don't know. But it was beautiful. Snacks, the same caterers as Google in Boston, so great food. I would come in, do work out, and then I would do more work, and I'd go home, and it's a beautiful place. I was getting really good reviews from my team, and I remember I felt miserable.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
I felt like it had these huge glass, windows and stuff. And I remember feeling like I was in a glass prison. And which is weird, right? It's like, it's a wonderful place, building up a career and all that stuff, but why do you feel that? And I think there's this thing about me where I feel, and maybe this is the missionary part of me, is like, if I don't feel like I'm either growing significantly or if I'm doing something that is meaningful or impactful, it just kills my soul. And I think that's what was happening. I was working on features which I thought was fun, but I just didn't feel like I was making a big impact. And I felt like I needed to be growing more. Like, this isn't where I'm supposed to be. Like, it was where I was supposed to be for the first 2-3 years, but now it's time for me to go. And so that's when I was started looking around, and this startup guy, chief product officer, he reached out to me, and he's like, "Hey, I'm looking to hire my first product guy. Like, you interested?" So I had lunch with him, I forget what I had with him, but I met up with him, and he was like, "Look, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get acquired within 2 years. So I know it's your first time going to startups. I know you really want to go into startups. So why don't we try this? And then, you do it for 2 years, and even if it doesn't work, then it's a great experience. Like, it's an amazing experience. And then now you can either go back to a big company because you have big company experience, or you can go back to a startups. Great. I'm like, yeah, 2 years, let's do it. And then after a year, we got acquired. But
You're like,
yeah,
come on. I was 2 years, but it was only a year.
yeah. That startup was really interesting. It was really fun. It was really fun. The funny thing was I was brought in as product. I was a product manager and eventually director of product. But at a startup, director of product, I had like one direct report. But the biggest thing that I learned there was I feel like I learned very little in product management because I kind of knew that side. The biggest thing that I learned was sales.
Hmm.
I had never done sales. Never had to at a big organization. You just do your function, your product management. There was total technically 27 people, but there were like 10 people who worked in the factory. So the software side, there was only like 16. So we were at this building on Canal Street in Boston, and it's just us. And so I was kind of like the lead guy on the product. So once I came in, I started handling the product stuff. My boss, the chief product officer, he started kind of helping on the finances and operations and stuff. So I was kind of leading product, and then I worked with the director of engineering, and then he's a young guy, and then the head sales guy. So they'd be like, "Hey, jump on the sales call," because they like hearing about the product. So I had never really been on sales calls before. What I did was I kind of treated it like a customer interview. I've done a lot of that. I've interviewed customers. I quickly learned there's a difference between interviewing customers and sales calls.
And then what were they?
Like for example, like customer interviews. So I think chicken or the egg. Like I don't know if it's because I was a product manager I got better at this, or because I was always just driven by I always like to know how things tick, and I like to ask people a lot of why questions. But I would ask a lot of why questions, like, oh, that's interesting. You say that's a challenge. Like, why is that a challenge? So basically, a customer would be like, hey, I'm interested in this feature. You have this feature. And you'd be like, salespeople normally be like, yeah, we got that feature. It's way better than the competitors, right? But me, I'd be like, interesting. Help me understand why are you looking for that feature? Like, what's the problem that you have that feature is solving? And they're like, oh, and then they start answering, and I remember we were sitting in a small room, taking this phone call, and it's the engineering, me, and the business development guy, and so I would ask a question like that, and they'd be like, it's on mute, and they're like, yeah, and they like high five me, like, yeah, great question, and then I asked another question, yeah, and then I asked another question, they're like silently mouthing, what are you doing? Why are you asking that question? And then we hang up, and they're like, why would you ask that question? I don't even remember what the question was.
Oh.
I think it was just kind of, once again, kind of like going customer interview. I just kind of like keep asking. They're like, why would you ask that question? And that's when I kind of like first learned, like, there's certain things that you should be asking and certain things that you shouldn't be asking. There's a lot of things that overlap, but there's some things like you have to be careful because you're always selling, and you have to be like, keep your reputation. So over time, I started getting better and better. And there was this one time we had an offsite because our mobile developers were on the West Coast. So we took a trip out to the West Coast because one of the developers, he had this crazy experience. He had fear of flying. And the reason he had a fear of flying was because he was once in like the small airplane, like with his mom and like some other person. He was in there, and the door went open. And I think he said part of his body went out of the plane. Like, I don't know if his arm, his leg, his torso, I don't know what it was. But he said ever since then he had this trauma that he could never get on a plane again. I'm like, that's pretty understandable. So we went over there. And so we had that offsite, and then, we're getting ready to leave. And then they call me and they're like, hey, Sam, are you still there in the LA area? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, why? They're like, oh, well, I think you're going to go. I think for some reason I had to go down to San Diego or something. But he's like, so, we met in San Diego. And I think he's like, well, we have this customer. They're called Intuit. And so Intuit is, in America, when you do your taxes, you can either do it yourself or you do it through a CPA. I don't even know what CPA stands for.
Yeah.
Anyway, certified public accountant. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so you can have CPA, but a lot of people just do their own taxes, so they'll use an online software, TurboTax, which is the company Intuit. So everybody knows Intuit. They're a very big player. And they're like, hey, there's Intuit. They're kind of interested in our product. And our product was like, you take a picture of a driver's license, and then you send it as an API to us, and then we'll tell you if it's like a real license or a fake license. So they're like, hey, they were interested. I think we're going to lose them, but you want to just stop by? And I'm like, I have never pitched alone to sales customers. Like, I've never done that before. And I'm like, but we're going to lose them anyway. So it's kind of like why not, right? I hate failing, but it's like hard to fail in this situation. So I stopped by, and I'm not at the point I'm like okay in sales, but what was interesting is I'm very passionate about things, maybe you know this, Ellen, about me, but it's certain things I'm really passionate about, and people can feel my passion. And so I kind of show them like, hey, there's a prototype, blah 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 blah, you know. And because I'm a product guy, like I understand the product on a deeper level than just the average sales guy. And then they're like, hey, we're interested. Um, let's have a bake off between a competition between you and our number one competitor at the time, and then let's put you head to head. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring a bunch of Intuit employees and have them test both solutions, and whichever one they like, we'll go with that one. So I was like, whoa, that happened. And then because I was the one who was there, I became like the account manager. So like on all the calls, I would be on there because I knew their background and stuff. And so the CEO was cool about it. He was just like, yeah, run with it. Like he was fine. He's very like empowering, which was cool. Um, and so we did the bake off. And what was interesting is the other company, their tech was I think pretty good, but their UI sucked. Their UI sucked. I cared a lot about UI. So I had a designer that I'd worked with at TripAdvisor kind of design our app, like look really nice. The interesting thing about this product, it is B2B, but our customers, the B2B, their customers are customers. So B2B to C. So what they care about is a great user experience. To them, it's important. To us, it's not important. Like our customers don't really care much about user experience, but our customers really care when they're selling to their customers. So I just happen to have worked at a B2C company for the past 3 years. So I learned a lot of like these basic principles of UX and stuff. So I'm like, I know the importance. So we made a really nice looking demo. And the day, I remember they first introduced internally, they told us later, they introduced it, but the one from our competitors, the UI sucked so much, they didn't even show theirs. They showed ours. And they're like, and everyone's like, whoa, this is like magic. This is like the future. And so we did the bake off and we won. Like we won and they're like, we'd like to sign a contract with you. And that's huge for a startup. Like you are trying to go after whales, right? So that was a huge whale. And they spun up a team of like 40 developers. They're going to build this platform and blah, 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 blah. And because I was the account manager, after we got acquired, they were going to make it public, but they would allow us 1 hour prior to it becoming public. Like our website, they basically already had the design. It's like Facebook has decided to acquire, you know, Confirm.io, but they give us 1 hour before to tell our customers. And the thing is, sometimes you acquire a company and you let them operate on their own. So you know, no change. You know, we got acquired, but no change. Here, Facebook was going to shut everything down. So we had to call our customers 1 hour before. So some of the customers we were talking to, I think it was like Samsung, which is funny. I remember my first meeting.
It always goes back to Samsung.
Yeah, I know. It was my first meeting with them. And I remember it was a team from Korea. And then, you know, you're all saying your names. And I'm like, hi, this is Samsung. And they all like laughed. And then I remember the next meeting I did it again. They didn't laugh. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that again. It's not funny anymore. The moment has passed. But I remember I had to call someone from Samsung. And I'm just like, hey, just like, I think, so within 1 hour before, that's the only window they gave you. So it's like, hey, I'm just letting you know that we got acquired by Facebook. They're shutting us down. They basically gave us a script that we could write. And they're like, what? And we're like, I'm sorry, you know, we can't answer any further questions, blah, 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 blah. When I called Intuit, they were like, what? And I'm like, hey, and they're like, wait, what? Are you going to continue your services? And we're like, you know, no, I think, you know, that we're going to stop all that. And he's like, we just assigned like 30, 40 people onto this project. Like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, you know, I'm sorry. And it was just very awkward for me. I never had to have a call like that.
Wow.
But yeah, that was so basically, like the biggest thing that I learned from there was how to do business development, how to do sales. And the thing I learned about myself was the sales guy that my friend, he said, you know, in sales, you generally have like two people. You have people who are kind of like sellers, and you have people like you. And he's like, Sam, you're like an honest guy. Like you are very honest, and so you will tell customers when like your product can't do certain things, right? But because they build up trust with you, like that's very powerful in sales. He's like, me, I'll get the sales done. And I'm like, is that better? He's like, no, it's just different. You got to be true to who you are, and you're like, you got to do you. And so the next job I got after that was basically the same thing that I was doing, but at a bigger scale, bigger team, global. Like we were working with Australian government, like stuff like that.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it was much bigger. It went from like a 20-person company to a 15,000 person company, but majority of that was hardware. Their software team was very small, and the biggest lessons I learned there was a lot of politics at that size company, and I am not good at politics. Well, at the time, I was not good at politics. I got much better after my friend started coaching me, and he was like, "Sam, why would you say that? Why would you do this? You know, blah 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 blah." And it was already 6 months into it, so it's kind of too late. But because of him helping me, he helped me understand like how to get better at politicking. I still don't think I'm great at politicking. I'm like okay, but the question is like, do I want to keep doing politicking? I don't, not really. I'd rather like devote my energy to like finding new products and services, like the discovery process, which I really love. And so I'm like, all right. So after a few years, I jumped, but that company was fun. They were headquartered in Paris, near Paris. It's actually a place called La Défense, which is about an hour, about 40 minutes outside of Paris. So in 2 years that I was there, I went to Paris, I think like 12 times. And then when I would go there, I would take the Sunday, like 6 p.m. flight. I'd arrive there at like 5 a.m., drop off my stuff. No, I wouldn't even drop off my stuff at the hotel. I'd go straight into the office and start working. And I'm like, dude, this is hard. This is tough. And I would be there until like Wednesday, Thursday, and then I would fly back. And it's like the first time you're like, oh, I'm gonna be in Paris. Yes, I'm gonna check this out. I'm gonna check that out. Yeah, I'm gonna be right next to the Louvre. And then the second time you're like, okay, I'll try somewhere else. And the third time you're like, okay, I'll try something else. And then as time goes on, your hotel gets closer and closer and closer to the workplace.
Oh.
And so now I found a hotel that was like 5 minute walking distance from the place. And so another funny thing is like when you're there early, like, you know, dinner, you're like, oh, cool, the company's gonna pay for it, so I wanna go to this fancy place and whatever. And then as time goes on, you go closer and closer and closer to your hotel room. Whereas near the end of my time there, I was basically getting room service.
Interesting. So it didn't really like matter that much. Fine dining, just eating, it didn't matter that much.
You know what's funny? You know, one of the things that I learned was you have this like I remember I started tasting. I really enjoyed foie gras, which is like duck liver, pate, and stuff. But I remember it was really good. It's really good food. But I was eating by myself at the bar, and I remember thinking that's when it really cemented for me. And I taught my kids this, and they also agree. It's like a certain percentage of the food experience is the food itself. There's a very uh, there's a good portion of that that is not food related. It's related with the people so that you can enjoy it, you know, that kind of thing. And I think everyone innately knows this, but I really felt it when I was eating this nice food alone and every meal alone. And I'm just like, man, this kind of sucks. Like, or I wish I were eating here with some like people I loved or people with friends and family and stuff.
After that, you started your missionary company, or soon after that, if I'm correct.
So I went to a startup, and then I went to another startup. So my last startup, it was in the Bay Area, and so that was so I went from my first startup was a Series B startup, about 25, 30 people. The next startup I went to after that was about 50 people. I think they had just raised their Series B. So and then when I left a year later, they were 100. So they were growing very fast. And then the last, I've always wanted to go earlier stage. So this latest one was seed stage, but I never thought that I could. The lower you get more equity, but the less they pay you. So that's what I was concerned about. But my wife and I kind of did the math, and we're like, I think we can pull it off. And so I've always also. It was cool that I'm living in LA, but I work remotely for a company that's in the Bay Area, and so I could go there every once in a while and stuff. So actually, I would go there about once a month. But yeah, so that was good. It was really good experience. That's actually where I first got a taste of the concept of the missionary company. Like I remember one of the things that I learned during my times at the big company was like the importance of managing up and having a good relationship with your boss. So my boss was a CEO, and so one of the first things I did was I'm like, hey, I'm gonna spend a lot of time in person with you. So one of the things we just started talking, and he was like such a breath of fresh air. Like he had such strong like values, and he's very mission oriented. And he was saying he said something very interesting. He's like, I want to build a great company, but he's like, But it's not just that I want to become rich. That is not the end goal. That is a means to an end. By building a rich, by building a very successful company, I want to show that it's possible to build a great company and have great culture. And I'm like, dude, that's like super important for me right now. And I couldn't articulate why, but that's kind of what it came down to. And so it was great. It was a great time. Over time, though, it turned out that it wasn't the right fit, and so culture fit. It was great, but it was what he was looking for in how to product. It was different than what I was delivering. So we just amicably, parted ways. But um, I think that really was like the first time. Like I was struggling a lot with like, do I want to stay in product management? What do I want to do? Do I want to be an entrepreneur? I've never been an entrepreneur. I have a wife and kids. I have mortgages. What do I do? But the concept of the missionary company, now that I think about it, came from him. Of that, I remember that night we were at the office. We kind of had our legs up on the table and we're just chatting like true Silicon Valley way, and we're just talking about these dreams of building a a place where you love working and yet is also super successful. And I think I've been thinking more about that. And I'm like, if you can do that, and then so I just happened to have a trip to go to Korea, and I went here and I was like, I wonder if the things that I learned in America, across the military, across startups, across these big tech companies, maybe it could be helpful here. Maybe you kind of there's this thing where you have these different phases in your career. Like the first phase is like you're building this mountain for yourself, and the second phase is like you want to help others, like this desire to help others and serve others. So I was kind of facing that moment, and I'm like, well, how can I serve the Korean people? And one of the things that I kept thinking about was, I think, well, a lot of this Korean people really care, really interested in what Silicon Valley is doing. Maybe I can bring that and teach them that. Um, but also, I was like, I wonder if it's possible to create this like missionary company where they're very successful, but also the people love working there. And I would talk to people here in Korea and in America, and they're just like, dude, I don't think that's possible. You hear how their work culture, and I'm like, but I don't. I know that's what led to them being successful until now. But I wonder if this other alternative way of working is possible. I think it is. And they're like, man, Korean culture, no, that's crazy. I'm like, but I think there's a demand for it. And as I started diving deeper into the Korean culture and asking a lot of people why questions, just trying to learn about the culture, there's the new generation here in Korea. They're not as interested in like making tons of money. They just kind of like want to live their life. They're more interested in like meaning and passion, and Gen X or Gen Z or whatever. In general, across the globe, they're more interested in working and working on something more meaningful. And I'm like, dude, the missionary company is like a perfect solution to that. You have a company where people, it's super like, it's this amazing vision that draws missionaries like, flies to poop. That wasn't the analogy I was thinking of, darn it. I was thinking of another analogy.
Flies to poo?
Yeah, I was thinking of like, like flies to a light or something.
Oh.
And I think that's what I was thinking. But even that, like, I think that like they get zapped by the light. So I'm like, shoot, I'm running out of analogies. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. So I remember just like, yeah, like missionaries, like you have this vision. And what is a vision? It's opinion that you have of the future that you think is possible. And it's so like, if it's just like a little bit better, people aren't really inspired. But something that's amazing that people are like, is that possible? Like, can we become multi-planetary? Can we really transition from gasoline cars to renewable energies like Tesla and SpaceX? Like, wow, that's crazy. Is that possible? But so that's when like you talk about the strategy. The strategy is, well, we're currently here. We go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. I think we can get there. And they're like, I'm in. Like, you want me to brush the toilets? Like, I'll do that. Like, I don't care. I just want to get in the company somehow. And so like, they'll go in and they love what they're doing. But the thing is, also, it's not just about missionaries being able to work in things that they're passionate about, because that's a hobby. If you want to do a hobby, that's fine, right? It has to also be something that they add value to the company needs. So it has to be a matching of both. And so there's this really cool thing that I heard from a coach. He was talking about and he probably got it from somewhere else, but there's these 4 zones. Have we talked about this before?
No.
Zone of incompetence, meaning you're not good at this skill, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. Zone of competence, you're somewhat good at it, but there are other people who are better than you. Probably shouldn't be doing that either. Zone of excellence. You do work, the work that you do is better than others. And you also you are recognized by others of bringing value to the organization, whether it's a company or nonprofit, whatever. They can recognize that value, right? The only problem is you don't love it.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Most people are stuck in that zone. Most people are stuck, especially around my age in late 30s and stuff. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm this whatever job," and they're like, "I don't really love it though." But I don't want to have to switch to another career because I don't even know if I'm going to be right for that. I have a standard of living, blah blah blah. So most people are stuck there. The fourth zone is zone of genius. So basically, you're super passionate about what you do. So work becomes play. You can play much longer than you can work. So you become an expert in that field, and it's in an area that the business really needs, and you love it. You love it, right? You just keep doing. You just keep going, and so zone of genius. So I've been thinking a lot about zone of genius, and so I think in missionary companies you have missionaries. That's like the base part of people who are really driven by mission, and they're working in their zones of genius. So they're working in an area where the company needs it, and it's creating immense value for the company. It can't just be a selfish thing. That's a hobby. Zone of genius is this. So anyway, yeah, yeah. Anyway, that's where kind of it came from, this idea, and as I've been thinking a lot about like, cool. So I'm a missionary. I'm driven by mission. So that's like the missionary company.
Yeah.
Is I want to help people. I think right now my hypothesis, I could be wrong, is to create a community of people who want to create missionary companies. So it starts with missionaries. So I'm looking for other missionaries first, like you. Find missionaries, and then people who want to create a missionary company. And then the question is, how do you create a missionary company? I thought a lot about it. It's not easy. There's a lot of like cultural stuff you have to do, like concept of how do you empower a team, how do you trust them, but also have accountability. Like it's very tough, but I think it's possible. And I think my goal is like try to build up missionary companies here. I guess the vision is to see the world full of missionary companies. And I think if you have missionary companies, it's not only going to make people happier, I think it can transform the world. I think it can transform society. Like how much problems are related to the current work culture because people aren't making enough money, they're stressed out, whatever. But if you can create jobs where they love and they're making good money, what will that mean for families? What will that mean for society? I don't know. But I think it'll have some impact. And at the very least, they'll enjoy what they're doing and they'll love it. How do we get there? That's the vision. How do we get there? I think you got to start somewhere. So I happen to be here in Korea. So it's like, it's almost like worst case scenario here. But if you can build it here, you can build it anywhere, right? So it's like, try to find some missionary companies, maybe startups, maybe government organizations, maybe, I don't know, whoever's like down to do this, find them, help support them, whether it's to help them with like product discovery, how do you create new products and services, and how do you do it in a way that you empower the team and blah, 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 blah. That's kind of what I'm doing right now with working with some Korean startups. And then you just kind of need like one case study. And then hopefully, I think one thing that Korea has going for it is they're very driven by trends. And so it spreads like wildfire, FOMO, everybody wants it. Fear of missing out. You spread it out and maybe it'll spread. And then, kind of step one is like Korea. Like maybe Korea is full of missionary companies. And then maybe step two is like start looking for other countries that are close by that are similar to Korea, like Southeast Asian countries. And then part three is the rest of the world. So yeah, pretty simple.
Pretty simple, guys. Take over the world. Yeah, I think that's a very nice way to like close off the podcast. And before we end up the podcast, the time is kind of it's kind of past what I was kind of hoping because I don't want to spend too much time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So could you just give like three just sentences, or actually not three? Let's just do one advice that you'd give to your younger self, someone 16 to 26 going through life. Yeah, it's a lot to think.
Find your zone of genius. It took me a while to find it, but it's possible to find it at 16. And if I had found it when I was 16, I can't imagine like the direction of my life would have been. So find your zone of genius.
And that's the end. That's a very dramatic way, but yeah. Sure. Okay. We're done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sam. Well, and let me just make sure